Hey friends, Kevin Morrison coming to you not live from Shafter High School out here in California. We're getting ready tonight for a big rivalry game with Wasco High School. Probably, however, not as big a rivalry as a century ago between the fundamentalists and the modernists. I'm not sure of what their records were on the field, but I know they didn't like each other. Excuse my poor attempt at humor. But I want to talk a little bit tonight about Dr. John Gresham Machen, who quickly became one of the faces of the fundamentalist side in this debate. So, early 20th century fundamentalist, he was a lifetime Democrat. He grew up in the Baltimore area, kind of among the elite. He was with an affluent family, kind of around those kind of people, and that led him to be culturally liberal but theologically conservative, which is it can break your brain if you let it. It made me think today of my daughter's cat who will go for a walk on a leash. And you're like, wait, what? No, that's not how that works. Cats don't do that. And here's kind of how we have the situation with Dr. Machen, culturally liberal but theologically conservative. People on both sides of the debate, though, definitely acknowledged that he was educated. He was an intellectual who could hold his ground in debate. And he had a lot of people following him, not just because of popularity, but because what he said had some weight behind it, because of who he was. And he had no problem breaking away from established institutions, whether it be seminary, whether it be denominational leadership. He had no problem saying, you guys are wrong. I'm going to go this way and do it the right way. So that was a very brief look at his life in that debate. I want to step away from that and look at a couple of newspaper clippings that I found today and observations that I made. And I'll preface it by saying my observations are not backed by any kind of expertise in the fundamentalist and modernist debate, but I found a couple things that just made me think, you know what, there's nothing new under the sun. When there's a line drawn in the sand, it's been fought the same way forever. So you can look at the way people dealt with him and the way he responded to others, and you see a lot of parallels in politics and probably some theology today, although theological debates today maybe are not as clear-cut one side or the other as they were between fundamentalists and modernists. But anyway, a few articles that I found that I want to point out some things about. So this is from the New York Times in 1924, and it's talking about a gentleman who gave up his pew, left the church, because he didn't like Dr. Machen's preaching. In fact, he said he can no longer waste his time in listening to the dismal, bilious travesty of the gospel. Learned a new word today. I had to look up bilious. Nauseating, if you're wondering. Maybe you can see it now as you look at bilious, how that would work. But he said, this guy, I can't listen to him anymore. Problem is, this was all spin and for show on his part, because another listener on that same day said that Dr. Machen was preaching from 2 Corinthians and didn't preach anything that was not sound Presbyterian doctrine. In fact, ironically, if you look at that passage in Corinthians, if any man be in Christ, he is a new creature. Old things are passed away. Behold, all old things are become new. Those words alone kind of sound liberal. So that what was preached apparently pushed Mr. Van Dyke out, but it was really a show of one side against the other in this fundamentalist and modernist debate. And you can see that today in politics. You're the opposite party of me, so whatever you say is wrong. That's just the way it is. True or not, that's the argument that's made, and that's the argument we can see happening here. Another article also from the New York Times 5 years later, this is talking about things changing at Princeton Seminary. Dr. Machen had no problems pointing out changes he didn't agree with. And this particular incident, not only were they doing it wrong, he didn't like how they were doing it the wrong way, wrong. So the truth is that this reorganization of Princeton Seminary is not only the wrong thing, but it is being done in a wrong way. He's saying, dude, you guys can't even get the wrong thing right. You're doing the wrong thing the wrong way. And I love this. So this is where I relate to Dr. Machen in my passive aggressive style. He said, instead, they engaged in unworthy and untrue personalities in an effort to represent the question as one of organizational efficiency instead of one of doctrine. I do not mean to impugn the good faith of these gentlemen. That must be left to their own individual conscience. I love that. I don't mean to say anything bad about these guys. So he and I would get along very well. I could actually learn a lot from him. Third article I want to look at, Presbytery drops Dr. J.G. Machen. This is from the Baltimore Sun, about 7 years after the last one. These articles span a 12-year time period. But the Presbytery of New Brunswick suspended Dr. Gresham until he repents of his sin. I just find this interesting because these are modernists who have just straight up set aside Orthodox doctrine of the church and deciding what means something and what doesn't. Do they know what sin means? That was the first thing that popped into my head. That's a question we can retroactively ask them. But here we have why they said this, because he deferred with a church affirmation that certain beliefs, including that of the virgin birth, were not essential church doctrine. He termed himself a fundamentalist and called those who subscribed to the affirmation modernists. So he had no problem drawing a line in the sand. When he did that, people said, "You're a sinner. Bye-bye." Not only that, they launched an investigation into that local church that had him preach, specifically the pastor, saying that there were claims of him complaining or criticizing about the Presbyterian General Assembly. I'm currently teaching French Revolution to my high school sophomores, and it's a wonder that fundamentalists didn't start getting their heads cut off with accusations like this and investigations, and almost sounds like we're hunting for communists in the 50s. So I find these observations interesting. I mean, of course, Dr. Machen is interesting, and I want to look into him more, but it's just the parallels between how people handle divide 100 years ago and today are, well, they're parallel, for lack of a better switch of phrase there. So I just find that interesting. And so there's Dr. Machen, an interesting character, an interesting face of the fundamentalist side. And here's some references that I used if you want to look at those. But thank you. That was only, that was fewer takes than last time. So I'm getting better, and go Shafter, beat Wasco.